Hey everyone, so yeah, it is Tuesday, April 15th, 2025. It is about 3:45 p.m., excuse me, on this afternoon. Very nice and breezy today, a little bit more different than yesterday. It was kind of warm and everything, so it's one of those La Nina-like effects and everything. But yeah, I wanted to come on here and basically do a review that I should have done last week, but the thing is, I had a lot on my mind. Basically, of course, one of the things mainly on my mind was getting myself mentally ready, for the dentist appointment, to kind of do a checkout and everything, see what's going on. And the surprising result of that is I do have good oral hygiene, which, even surprised me. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, some of my teeth are damaged, broken, and everything, but yet I still have good oral hygiene. What's going on there? And I think it has to do with the fact that I've been using the Sensodyne toothpaste, or the Pronamel Sensodyne toothpaste and mouthwash, the ones they've been advertising with actual dentists, apparently. And they do say that the Pronamel is, especially the one they've been doing the most advertisement of recently, is 3 times stronger, 3 times better. And, you combine that with the mouthwash, and it does seem to be proving that point. It does seem to be proving that point. But with that said, basically I'm going to find out on the 28th when I go in for consultation, as well as extraction, exactly what's going to be the next step. And it sounds like all signs are pointing toward partials in the back and a bridge implant potentially in the front. So yeah, basically that's what it looks like it's going to be heading toward. And what's funny is my grandmother basically had partials as well, but she always ate with them. So that was kind of weird. So I don't know if that's a miscommunication that the lady, gave me or something. I'm not really sure. Or my grandmother may have been doing it the wrong way, because they say when you eat, you got to take those partials out. And I'm thinking it's because it could damage them, and by damaging them, you could break them down and you could accidentally swallow them or something. I don't really know. But the bridge implant on the front will be good, and I should be all right and everything. Yeah, the eating habits might change a bit, not too much, but they might change a bit. We'll see what happens. But that's what's going on there. The other good thing as well is that my unemployment is going to be a lot more this year than it was last year. I'll put it this way. Well, every 2 weeks last year, I had a total of 482 coming in. Here, I'm going to have basically, I'm gonna basically have, I'm trying to find the right word to say, I'm going to have basically 114 more coming in. So combined 114 to the 482 that I would get every 2 weeks last year to what I'm getting this year. And yeah, it's going to be a lot more. It's going to be very helpful in the end. And I might even get myself a MetaQuest 3 or maybe just a MetaQuest 3S, because I've been eyeing that as well to, have a little fun with and, enjoy myself with and everything in the future. But with that said, I want to, like I said, come on here and do this review of Dark Side of the Ring on Vader, which I didn't do last week because of all things on my mind. So with that said, let's get on to this review. But I just wanted to update you guys on to why I didn't get to it so far, as to what's been going on. And let's get on to the review, shall we? Let's talk about Dark Side of the Ring from last week as we prepare for tonight's Dark Side. Alright, so last week's Dark Side of the Ring was on Big Van Vader, real name Leon White. And I thought it was pretty good. I mean, they did go over stuff, a lot of people have already talked about and reported on when it comes to Vader, how he started out and everything. They did touch upon that he came from a family that basically, I think both parents are alcoholics or something. I got to go back and watch. But yeah, it was a decent watch. It was definitely a decent watch and everything. And again, they mostly went over his career. And the main focal point here was he could never, according to his ex-wife, who they did interview, they got his ex-wife, they got his son to be interviewed with this. They also got Jim Cornette, they got Jim Ross, they got this one guy, I can't think of his name right now, who Vader paralyzed in a match and everything. So yeah, they got some talking heads, decent talking heads for this, and they got Stan Hansen as well. But basically, like I said, they went over his wrestling career and how he started out in the AWA as Leon Baby Bull White, and how he started off with the likes of Bruiser Brody, Bruiser Brody, and Stan Hansen and everything. And they talk about his time in the AWA under that persona and everything, and then of course his time in Japan, where Antonio Inoki wanted a new monster gaijin, if you will, because that's what they're known as over there, gaijin. And he wanted a guy that he could get in the ring with, and he could put over. And basically, the choice for that individual that would become Vader is actually was kind of surprising when you think about it, because there were two names before Leon White to be chosen for that role. The first one was Jim Hellwig, aka the Ultimate Warrior, before he signed with WWE. He was in WCC World Class Championship Wrestling as Dingo Warrior, and he was like one of the first choices before he signed with Vince. The other choice, Sid Uni. Sid Uni. Sid Uni. Basically Sid, Psycho Sid. Sid Vicious, Sid Justice. He was the other choice, but he signed with Jim Crockett in NWA WCW. So Leon was the obvious choice. And Antonio wanted him obviously more so than the other two because he had this look. And this look was basically based on something from Japanese folklore, that he had a well-renowned manga artist, not manga, but manga artist, draws the same manga artist that drew the design for Jushin Thunder Liger. And basically, this manga artist drew this design for Vader to make his debut with, with the helmet and everything, the Mastodon helmet and everything, stuff like that. And, long story short, Antonio had a match with a wrestler. I think it was Ricky Chosen or something like that. And what happened is the match ended up in double disqualification. Fans were not thrilled with it. And, the police had to, calm things down a bit. And, this is before things really got out of hand, because it was during the displeasure by the fans and this disqualification stuff, or double count out, whatever disqualification. That's when Vader showed up and, challenged, and Antonio, I should say, I think, from what I understand, challenged him to an impromptu match, and Vader squashed him in like 2 minutes. Basically turned Antonio Inoki, this legendary Japanese Hall of Famer, into essentially a jobber, an enhancement talent. And that didn't go out well over with the fans either. And the police really had to step in to try to calm things down from escalating any further. They did go over his match with Stan Hansen, where Stan Hansen knocked his eyeball out. He had to take off his mask to try to push his eyeball back into the socket. I mean, you watch that match and you see what happened there. It was just gnarly and everything. But that match apparently is what got him signed by WCW, got him noticed by WCW, while they were still, under the NWA banner, but they were being more of their own identity. That's what got him noticed. And that's what led to his debut at the Great American Bash, I think it was in 1990, against Tom Zink, where Tom Zink got squashed. And basically from there, the rest is history, because, he was still obligated to Japan. He'd still be able to do events there and everything. Even when he became pretty much full-time with WCW, he'd be able to go back to Japan when the opportunity presented itself and compete. He'd be able to do that. They didn't go with the fact that he competed not just for New Japan, but during his time with WCW, and I think even during his early portion with WWE, WWF that is, he also got to do a little bit of UWFI, which is a kind of a hybrid wrestling, or was a hybrid wrestling promotion in Japan, but it was also known for shoot fighting, primarily for shoot fighting or shoot wrestling. So he was part of that. They didn't go over that. They may have shown some highlights, but they didn't go over it. They just went over his time in New Japan and everything. And again, how that match with Handsome got him noticed by WCW when they were still under the NWA banner, but becoming their own thing. They did go over the fact that he became champion, beating Sting and everything. So that was, they went over that. But what was interesting though is the main outline of the entire, of the entire episode. The main outline was, according to his ex-wife, there were times, not a lot of times, that basically Leon could not differ himself from the Vader character. He became so enriched and so, involved with being the Vader character that he couldn't separate himself from it. He couldn't separate, being Vader even outside of the ring. And basically, this led to a lot of conflict, with other wrestlers and everything, because the way it sounds like to me is Leon Vader had a split personality, had like a bipolarness, in my opinion. Because again, he couldn't tell the difference between, okay, when you're in the ring, you're Vader. When you're doing promos for matches, you're Vader. When the camera's off and you're out of the ring, you're Leon. He couldn't tell the difference. And this led to a situation to where it's a very famous match for Vader, because even though it's an enhancement match, a handicap enhancement match, they interviewed the guy he was in the ring with during that match, who he ended up paralyzing. Paralyzed, almost lost my train of thought there. I was trying to think about. I'm doing this outside, so there's a little bit of distractions here and there, and everything. People are starting up the lawnmowers and everything. So I do apologize if I feel a little distracted. But the point I'm getting at is, and I'm trying to think about the guy's name and all that as well. But anyway, this guy that they did interview was part of the handicap match and everything. And he's the one that basically got destroyed. He got his career ended by Vader in the ring. Yeah, he got his career ended by Vader in the ring. And what happened was, apparently Vader basically was okay with him in the back. Like, he was talking to him saying, hey, you and I are working together. Can you take the power bomb? And he's like, yeah, I can do that. But it's like, as soon as that bell rang, according to him, Leon became Vader. He just basically became a different person. He started telling him to, you better, like when he was setting them up for the choke slam, saying, you better jump, motherfucker, and all that, and stuff like that. And then, he hit, the way he powerbombed him after that too, it was so snug. It basically ended his career because it broke his back. Almost severed his spine. Now, he did make a full recovery, but I guess Vader finally snapping out of this, being Vader, Leon went to go check on him in the hospital, and this guy, I think his name is Jesse, just unloaded on him verbally and everything because of what he did. Because if there's one thing, and even Solomon went over this when he was talking about this episode, and everybody's always talked about this, is when you're in the ring, your main priority is to protect your opponent. Your main priority is to protect, your opponent and everything, and not let them be hurt. That is your main priority. That is your main priority, to make sure your opponent. Hold on for a second while I do something, guys. I don't know, something else is on right now. Hold on. I don't know why. Hold on. Let me do something here for a second. I don't know if you hear any music or anything in the background, so I do apologize if you do hear something. So, but anyway, like I was saying, basically this guy, he verbally laid in on Vader for what he, for being reckless. Because again, as Solomon Hunter pointed out in his review of it, one thing is, and everybody has talked about this too, your one mission in that match, on both ends of the spectrum, is to keep your opponent safe and protect it. That is your main priority. That is your main thing. You keep your opponent safe and protect it. That's about it. You don't get you don't abandon that and get reckless with them. But that's what happened. Now, basically, like I said, they did go after that. They did go over his career, his matches with Mick Foley as Cactus Jack, and everything. They did go over a little bit of that, but they also kind of went over his situation with Hogan, and they did have some audio inserts from some shoot interviews he's done, and basically Vader said that when he powerbombed Hogan during a Clash of the Champions back in January of '95, that he felt like he was double-crossed because when he turned around, because what he did is he powerbombed Hogan. They showed this. They powerbombed Hogan. Then he turned his back on Hogan and posed to the crowd. Now, Leon Vader basically said he was double-crossed because Hogan got up and no-sold the powerbomb. That's his version of things. But here's the thing. Wrestlers are always known to fabricate. Fabricate things to make themselves look good and the other opponents they've been in the ring with look bad. And I say this with all due respect. I think Leon Vader was saying that to make himself look good during that interview. But the point I'm getting at is he was doing the one thing that all heel wrestlers are known to do, so that have worked with Hogan, to allow him to make his comeback, to make himself look good in the end, and that is he turned his back. And what does Hogan do? What is the recipe? You take Hogan down with an attack post-match or during the match, you make it look like you've won, then all of a sudden, boom, he pops back up. And that's exactly what happened. Hogan popped back up, and Vader, obviously, Leon, again, trying to, I think, fabricating the situation, tried to make himself look good. By saying, I got double-crossed. No, you didn't. You knew what you had to do. You were probably told what you had to do, and you did it, but maybe you felt like, I'm assuming this. He probably felt like Hogan was supposed to sell it for a few minutes later, or a few minutes more, and that maybe as he turned around, that's when Hogan would pop up. I don't know. But, I think he knew. But here's what was interesting about the whole situation. Leon's son, who also, believe it or not, wrestled for WWE under the Florida Championship Wrestling developmental brand before it became NXT, and wrestled briefly for them there, or under that brand. They talked to him, like I said, and he basically said that when Vader, his dad, was in the ring with Hogan in WCW, that it was a watered-down version of what we had seen previously, because he had been stiff and snug with wrestlers like Sting, Cactus Jack, Ron Simmons, and so on. Even to the point that some were reluctant to get in the ring with him because they knew how stiff and snug he could be. But according to Vader's son, when he got in the ring with Hogan, he was basically told, water it down, tone it down. And obviously, I think that's maybe what he was alluding to in that. When you think about it, I think maybe that's what, Vader was alluding to in that shoot interview when he said he felt like he was double-crossed. Not because of the powerbomb, but mainly because, he felt that the company would not let him be him like he had done before when he came to Hogan. And I think Jason Solomon was right. Solomonster, that is. If I'm somebody in charge of WCW, in this case Eric Bischoff, I'm not going to let someone that's known to be stiff and snug when they get in the ring with their opponents and even potentially injure and legitimately hurt their opponents. I'm not about to let him do that to my new star attraction, someone that I was lucky enough to get to come to WCW and take away from his, long-time home in WWF. So, yeah, basically, going up against Hogan, was essentially just, and like I said, in Vader's son's mind was just a watered-down version of what his father was because he had to play to Hogan's strength. That's what it was. And, yeah, some of the matches were not good. I mean, some matches were okay. I think Super Brawl was fine. The cage in Huntington Beach was okay. The cage match at Bash at the Beach in Huntington was okay. But yeah, some of the matches were good, some of them were not. I mean, of course, the uncensored match in '95 was not good because it was a strap match. But here's the thing: Hogan won the match. Yeah, Hogan won the match by touching all 4 corners, but he won it by dragging the wrong man who was never in the match officially, and that's Ric Flair. Because Ric Flair, storyline-wise, was obsessed because of the fact that Hogan had retired him, and Flair basically wanted to get even. He wanted to do whatever he could to get even with Hogan, and this did eventually lead to Hogan and Savage and Story getting Flair reinstated. But be that as it may, basically though, the other matches, the ones we know from Super Brawl and Bash at the Beach, I thought were okay. But here's what happened though. And they didn't go over this, and Salamonster didn't talk about this either. But what happened though later on after the Bash, after the Bash and everything, and even between that, they didn't even go over this. But in between the Bash at the Beach event and all that, they had Vader temporarily as part of the Dungeon of Doom, and then he went his separate ways from them. And if that's not enough, after the Bash at the Beach situation and everything there, they started to slowly turn Vader babyface. And Vader was all ready to be teamed up with Hogan, Sting, and Savage at War Games until he had that incident with Paul Orndorff. And what it was is that Paul Orndorff was an agent for the company at the time, not totally retired, because I want to correct Jason on this. Because from what I remember, Orndorff was still... Hold on for a sec, guys. I got a little bit of an itch here. There we go. If you heard anything, that was just me itching my shoulder. But anyway, like I said, Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful, was an agent for WCW at that time, but he wasn't totally retired. I want to correct Jason on this because I do recall, and you can go and watch some of the Nitros on the WCW Vault when they pop up over time, and if they still have some on the Peacock Network. Basically, Orndorff, even though he was an agent, he was still wrestling, and he made several appearances on Nitro. I do recall that. I do remember that. But the point I'm getting at, and these are not the ones back in 2000. These are like 95 and all that, when this would all take place. But getting back on topic and everything, essentially what happened during this, because again, like I said, Vader was set to team up with Hogan, Sting, and Savage in War Games against the Dungeon of Doom. And what happened instead is the backstage incident, which led to him being fired. The backstage incident where basically he was late to the building. Orndorff got in his face and said, you got interviews to do, get your fat ass moving, Vader took up, and obviously Vader took exception to this, and they got into a brawl to where Orndorff beat him up. He beat him up with sandals on and everything, kicked him when he was down and bleeding. And Orndorff, obviously very reliable as an agent, in WCW, was not going to take the fall, so Vader did. And this was in the midst of Vader. Being ready to team up with Hogan and Sting and Savage for War Games and everything. So yeah, they skipped over that and everything and all that. And again, I do want to correct Jason on the fact that Orndorff was still wrestling. He was semi-retired, not totally retired, because again, I do recall seeing him on Nitro a couple of times as well. They did go over his run in WWE, which when you go back and watch it, looked like, despite the injury he had to take time off for surgery and stuff before coming back in time for WrestleMania. Basically, Vader was presented to be like a big monster heel, but the issue is that Vince had no idea what to do with this guy because he'd never seen him outside of what he watched in WWE. All he was going off of was what Jim Cornette was telling him, what Jim Ross was telling him, and stuff like that. That's all he was going off of. He wasn't going off of, oh, I saw what this guy did in Japan. I saw what this guy did in WCW. He wasn't going off any of that. He wasn't. So what happened basically, long story short, is that even though he did seem like he was on the verge of having a dominant run in the company, at least for 96, injury or not, it basically was not, in my honest opinion, it just was not a good move for Leon. I think that, this is my opinion, I just don't think it was a good fit for him, all right? I mean, we see nowadays that talents that were part of WWE, for a time, even briefly, when they go to AEW, it's like they have a new lease on life, despite how we feel about the product, right? But when we see them having that new lease on life, it's basically their way of saying, hey, WWE, it's not fit for me right now anymore, or I'm not a good fit for WWE right now. I might be when I come back again, down the line, because there are going to be some that are going to go back. There's no doubt. I know Ricochet will go back, despite what people might say. But anyway, the thing is, to me, it just was not a good fit for him. I mean, he tried. There's no doubt. He did try. But it just was not a good fit for him. I mean, they even involved him in several storylines, even later on after 96. Just was not a good fit for him, period. It wasn't. Because basically, when he came in, they were still doing the cartoony stuff. Yeah. I mean, you could say, oh, they were kind of getting out of it and everything. Yeah, they might have, but they were still totally entrenched in it. They were still totally entrenched in the gimmicky things of, the gimmicky way of things, being done there. So, to me, Vader, I don't think was a decent fit for them. I don't really think he was. I think, honestly, if I'm going to be truthful with you, I think Vader would have been a better fit. Vader would have been a better fit for ECW. That's just my opinion. I think he would have been a better fit there because he could be stiff, he could be snug as much as he wants, and the style in the environment, the aura, if you will, the environment and aura of ECW at that time, just starting to find their identity, would have fit him better. They would have fit him better. And then maybe you could have him go to WWE, because Vince was in partnership with ECW for a time. He was in partnership with them up to 97. So I think if he would have done the ECW thing for about a year, Vince would have took notice and been like, hey, this guy, I want him. There you go. In the story. But that didn't happen. It just was like, okay, he's done with WCW. He's going to go to WWE. Now, he did do some matches, in between for, like I said, UWFI, even New Japan and All Japan. There's no doubt. And I think he even did some matches in Mexico before he went to WWE. But point is, I just feel it wasn't a good fit for him, because a lot of those men there that he would be in the ring with, like a Shawn Michaels, like an Undertaker, they were not used to that stiff style. They would become accustomed to it. They'd get used to it themselves later on and start applying it themselves later on. But not many talents were used to it at that moment. They weren't. So even though he tried in that company, it just, to me, it was not a good fit for him. And for him to say the line that he did in that match, he lost to Kane at No Way Out in 98, because he was fed that line by Vince, pretty much summed up how his whole career was there. It really did. Now, did they rectify it later on when they had him come back for the reunion, for that Heath Slater story that they were doing, that Legends story that they were doing and everything? Yeah, they did rectify him a little bit, don't get me wrong. I mean, they rectified him a lot better than they did, his previous return when he tried to help coach along with, Goldust against Batista. They tried to rectify it there too. But point is, I think his match with Slater, as brief as it was, I think was a better, redemption for him in that company than anything. Now, of course, they didn't go over his time in NWA TNA, but that was only for like a couple of matches. But still, he was treated better in TNA than I think he was initially in WWE, period. But anyway, of course, after, like I said, after you got some pigeons going at it over next door. But anyway, after WWE, he went back to Japan. And even though Jericho said, he had a brief resurgence, no, he had a big resurgence. Because I remember reading the magazines and reading some results, and I do apologize for that vibrational there, guys. That's my phone. I'm doing this on my phone. That's the one thing about recording on phones and everything. You're going to get vibrational noises of messages, text, and all that. So I do apologize. Notifications and stuff, so I do apologize. But anyway, though, getting back on topic, like I said, he did have a huge resurgence in Japan. He became the All Japan Triple Crown champion. He won, I think, several tournaments. He became a tag champion. He did okay in 1999. He did. And I think that's why in like early 2000s, 2002, 2003, because of that resurgence, they brought him into TNA. And then I think that's why later on, even many years later, they said, let's give him a redemption match against Slater, be done with it. And they did. And again, that's why they also brought him back to be part of the short-lived, improv, pivoted storyline between Batista and Coach. So yeah, they tried to redeem him twice, and I think the second time around they did decent, in my opinion. They did decent. But yeah, they did say that because of his situation, him doing his run with the company WWE, he was gaining more weight. Him and Yokozuna got sent to a weight loss clinic in Duke University, which didn't really help out because they'd find a way to get fried chicken snuck into them and all that. And yeah, just a lot of things started to really not work for him. And of course, having the hard-hitting style he's had, he was, of course, addicted. He had to take painkillers and alcohol and stuff like that. And he was passed out on a plane and put into basically, I think it's because of alcohol or drugs or something like that. And he was in a coma for at least 3 weeks and all that before he came out of it. And basically, I guess just didn't really compete that much anymore until he had that match in Rev Pro against Will Ospreay, which, obviously Will Ospreay was supposed to apparently go over, but Vader said, no, I'm not putting this little guy over. And the reason for that match is because Vader was very critical, one of the many old school talents that was very critical about the fact of what Ricochet and Ospreay did in the ring. And this is before Ricochet went to WWE. He was, not happy with that. There were several other wrestlers that were not happy with that. So basically, this Rev Pro saw the opportunity of, hey, this guy, even though he's 60, could still kind of move in the ring, go in the ring. Let's get him in there to put Will over. But Vader's like, look, I'll come and, have the match with Will, but I ain't putting him over. He's putting me over. And Will basically being dedicated to Rev Pro at that time said, look, I don't want nothing to go wrong with this place. I don't want no trouble for this company. I'll put the guy over. And he did. He did. Even though he said it's probably the worst match he's ever had and doesn't want to think about it. But yeah, basically a lot of things plagued Leon White afterwards, from the drugs where he was passed out and everything, and diabetes. And the last time he got found passed out was, I think, by his son or something like that. And they had to rush him to the hospital where he was pretty much remained until it was decided that because of the condition he was in and everything, and his son had to spoon feed. His son basically said that his father was in such a state he had to spoon feed him. He had to spoon feed him food, which is something that not many kids want to do with their parents. But anyway, it's like, the time came where the decision was made to where he knew basically he wasn't going to be around much longer, because he got the news from his doctor that he had this congestive heart condition. He only had 2 years to live, and almost exactly 2 years after he was given that diagnosis, is when he passed away. And the decision was because his ex-wife was given the power to basically keep him going or pull the plug. And it's like, no, we can't let him suffer like this anymore. And they made the decision, pull the plug, let him go. And, that's how things ended. But yeah, honestly, if I go back to his career in WWE, I don't think he should have gone there directly, after WCW, even though he made a few appearances in Japan and Mexico in between. I think, honestly, and I know people would think I'm crazy for saying it or suggesting it, I think he should have tried ECW for a bit. Because when you know that Vince is going to have that connection with them later on, I think that would have opened the door for Vader to show up in WWE maybe a year later and really dominated and everything, because when you think about it, Sid, after he had his time in WWE over, what was it, like 97, I think, 97, 98, something around that, 97. What did he show up in 98 before going back to WCW? He showed up in ECW and reestablished himself as a dominant force. That's what got him noticed to go back to that's what got him noticed to get re-signed to WCW. So I think if Vader would have took a similar direction, a similar course, if you will, a year prior or so, I think he would have been better off in WWE, because Vince would have been like, hey, this guy's a monster in ECW. I want him as a monster here. Because, again, Vince was having that connection with ECW and Paul Heyman, so it would only made sense that I think that would have been the best direction. But that's just my opinion. That's kind of like a, should have been, situation in my opinion. That's what I think could and should have happened if I was in Vader's shoes. But, basically you make the decisions because you feel like it's the right decision, and it just didn't turn out to be the right decision in the end, in my opinion. But overall, though, I thought the episode was good, and look forward to tonight's episode. They're going to be talking about the career, and thank God he's still with us, of Mr. USA Tony Atlas. The guy that basically paved the way for a lot of these super strong muscle guys, Mr. Olympia-like wrestlers, world's strongest people in WWE in wrestling, period. But guys, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode from last week. What did you think overall? What do you think they left out that they should have touched upon? Love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, guys, I will talk to you all later. So if you heard anything there, I'm getting ready to turn off the recorder here. But let me know what your thoughts were overall on this. Love to hear your thoughts on the situation. Do you think Vader should have waited a year, done what Sid did before he went back to WCW, and that's doing ECW run? What are your thoughts? Give me those thoughts down below. Love to hear you, how you feel about it and everything. And do you think he is right that maybe he was betrayed in WCW when it came to his storyline, his feud with Hogan? Let me know. Love to hear your thoughts and everything and all that. And oh yeah, before people say you forgot to mention the Shawn Michaels situation, yeah, that didn't help either. And that's why I feel like he should have waited at least a year before going there and did a little stint in ECW or somewhere where Vince pays it, in a company or promotion that Vince has some attention to outside of his own. And I think basically if he would have done that, it would have been better. But yeah, the Shawn Michaels thing at SummerSlam did not help. It didn't. But overall, though, guys, let me know what your thoughts are on the episode. How do you feel about it? What do you think they left out and everything? What do you think they could have touched upon more and expanded on more? And do you think do you think he should have waited and done a little stint in ECW or elsewhere? What are your thoughts? Let me know down below in the comments, as well as in the live chat during the premiere. Like the video, do all the things in the description and everything. You can find me at all your favorite audio, video, podcast affiliates like iTunes, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Audible from Amazon, Radio Public, Overcast. Anywhere there's a podcast, you'll find mine. You can also find me over at rumble.com at BW Roses, Odyssey.com at BW Roses, VENMO at BW Roses. You can also find me at TikTok at BW Roses, X.com, aka Twitter at BW Roses, Blue Sky at BW Roses. You can also find me at Patreon.com at BW Roses, and you can find me at VENMO, or not VENMO, but Venmo and Cash App. You can support me there too. And you can also find me at divanart.com at bzw1979 and at inkbunny.net at bwroses. Also check out the Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are overall on this episode. And until then, I am out.